Someone has an idea, a coalition of people get around it, it passes, and then $100 billion gets invested in places that were not on people's investment radar before it passed. Like, that is really encouraging.
Welcome to More Than Profit, the podcast where values, vision, and capital converge. Produced by Access Ventures, this show spotlights the leaders and innovators redefining success, not just through financial returns, but by the impact they create. Every episode dives into the inspiring stories, bold ideas, and hard-won lessons of those who are leveraging capital, financial, intellectual, and social, for equity, sustainability, and systematic change. Whether you're an investor, entrepreneur, or purpose-driven professional, we are here to challenge the status quo, push the boundaries of traditional investing, and inspire you to align your resources with your values. Join us as we explore how capital can be a force for meaningful change.
In life, there's a certain kind of person whose presence over years, over projects, over late-night conversations about systems and capital and purpose keeps reminding you that long-term thinking is not only possible, but it's powerful. And my friend, Ross Baird, is that kind of person for me. Ross and I have been friends for over a decade now, and he was actually on More Than Profit back in season 1 5 years ago. And that conversation with Ross, it stuck with me, not just because of what we talked about, but because of who he is. Here's what impresses me about Ross. Yes, he's an investor, a founder, a policy mind, but first and foremost, he's relational. At the core of his work, whether at Blueprint Local or in his advocacy around opportunity zones, is a belief that relationships matter more than transactions, that capital, if directed with care and humility, can heal communities rather than extract from them, that people, especially overlooked people, deserve not just a place to live, but a place to thrive. I remember a quote he shared last time, that if you start by asking, what does this person need? Instead of, what can I get from this? Everything changes. And that stayed with me. I've watched him live that out across years of complex deals, across a housing crisis, and through an era when optimism, yes, real grounded optimism, is hard to come by. In this episode, we dig into the evolution of opportunity zones, the lessons that Ross has learned investing over $200 million in underinvested communities, and what's next as Congress considers expanding this program. But we also talk about time, about what a 10-year commitment really looks like, about systems change, and why Ross still believes that it's possible. And at the heart of it, we talk about people, because that's where Ross always starts, and it's always where he returns. Okay, Ross. So you and I obviously have been friends for a very long time, and you were on the podcast 5 years ago. You were part of season 1, which was a lot of fun. Very different back then. I think all of season 1 was done in person. And actually, we kind of hit on a lot of different aspects. So your work is super impressive. You've been in impact investing, traditional investing, impact investing, launched a couple of firms in your history. But our topic last time was around friendship, which was fun to kind of dive into. Friendship and impact. And so one of the things that you emphasize at the heart of your investment philosophy is the belief that at the primacy of relationships over transaction. I think that's what I've always appreciated about you is as you think about communities or companies, when you think about impact, you've always emphasized people. That it's the people in the communities, it's the overlooked citizens that we are enacting change upon through capital. And one of the things I remember, one of the quotes you had was, if you start by asking, what does this person need? Instead of what can I get from this, everything changes. I'd be curious, 5 years in, new firm, what is that still true for you? Like what aspects of that, as you think about the primacy of relationships over the transaction, having invested now $200 million plus into real estate and opportunity zones, what does that look like for you in your kind of your daily work?
Yeah, thanks, Bryce. And first of all, thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm a Longtime listener, second time caller, I guess. So it's a delight to be back. Yeah, there's a saying that I think about a lot. I don't actually know, so I should probably look this up, but you always overestimate what you can do in a year, and you always underestimate what you can do in 10 years. And you and I have been friends for longer than 10 years, and we have done so many things together. It's pretty impressive. And I think relationships, trust compounds, and it also, it can also go away in a moment. Warren Buffett says, it can take a career to build a reputation, an instant to destroy it. And I think that really the philosophy that drives how you generate real impact, and also I think real financial success with your investments, is taking a long view. And so one of the things, and we'll talk about this, about the Opportunity Zone program, I think the very best thing about the Opportunity Zone program is, at its base, it is a tax incentive to invest in distressed communities that are historically underinvested, and there's some desire to turn it around. The very best thing is you only get the tax incentive if you are invested in the project for at least 10 years. And 10 years is such a long time. It is, 5 years ago, 5 years ago, pre-COVID, just thinking brass tacks, like in the real estate world, people thought, housing is really complicated. You have to deal with all these people. Office buildings are much simpler. Like, everyone should invest in office and maybe tangle with housing if you want. Today, office is untouchable, and there's a 7 million person housing shortage in the country, and multifamily is seen to be a much different asset. And I think that, who knows what's going to happen 5 years from now? Maybe it'll be the same, maybe it'll be different. But I think that because of that, short-term thinking it can kill relationships, and it can kill investments. So I think that, going back, if you go into a relationship or an investment or a transaction saying this is going to be 10 years minimum, I think about it very differently than, how can I extract maximum value for myself out of this person or conference or phone call or whatever that would be.
That's really good. Yeah, and the other thing, one of the things that actually drew me to you, over 10 years ago, was that many people talk about changing systems. And and we like to riff on like systems theory, systems change, but like many people talk about it, but few actually do anything. Few actually try to do it. What gives you kind of the conviction to continue to pursue systemic change in what I would say kind of historically entrenched sectors? Like, you've been in sectors like housing and finance and energy and different things, but they're super entrenched. What gives you that conviction to continue to pursue that?
Because if you take a long view, like, I have seen change happen. It can happen. The opportunity.
You're old, Ross. You're old, and you've got enough years to have seen the change.
Yeah, I'm 40 years old now, but I guess I'm still an optimist and not jaded. That's
I love it.
Talk to me again when I'm 50, but I would like to believe I'll still be an optimist. I think, Opportunity Zones are a good example. And you and I were at initial conferences together in 2014, 2015, where there were a couple of economists talking about this idea. And there were all of these initiatives. You and I were involved in Steve Case's Rise of the Rest initiative, saying the vast majority of capital is going to places like New York and LA and cities like Louisville, where you live, or Georgia, states like Georgia, where I grew up, are not getting the vast majority of investment capital. And so Opportunity Zones, these two economists came up with this idea to say, if we give people a tax advantage to invest where they're not currently investing, and we make people commit to staying in these communities with their capital for 10 plus years, that will really change how capital flows. And 5 years later, Opportunity Zones are the most successful economic development program in history by private dollars invested. There's been almost $100 billion invested in the bottom 20% of zip codes, which I think exceeds the expectations of what happened when this law passed. And the way the law passed, it got bipartisan support from over a dozen senators of both parties, very different backgrounds. Cory Booker, who used to live in the housing projects of New York, and Tim Scott, who grew up extremely poor in South Carolina, come together and co-sponsor it. And smart senators like my home state senator, Mark Warner, Democrat, pragmatist in Virginia, Todd Young, pragmatist Republican in Indiana, who I know you've done a lot of work with. It was a true bipartisan coalition. Then it passes. And it passed because in the old, I mean, this makes me an optimist, like the old schoolhouse rock days of how a bill becomes a law. Somebody has an idea, and if you get enough votes, it becomes a law. Like that actually happened with opportunity zones. It was the idea of what ended up becoming a coalition of people, including Access Ventures and Blueprint and others. And so someone has an idea, a coalition of people get around it, it passes, and then $100 billion gets invested in places that were not on people's investment radar before it passed. Like that is really encouraging. And I think there is a lot. I live outside DC. There's a lot about DC that is absolutely discouraging, but it is there continue to be very exciting bright spots in the country.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've been a pioneer since the beginning. Like you said, like you were in those conversations, you were kind of transitioning out of Village Capital, thinking about what's next. Again, back at that systems level, thinking, how do we actually really affect change in these local communities at a grand scale? How can we move capital in significant ways to support these communities? And historically, we've done things like new market tax credits or low-income housing tax credits. How would you explain, like, what differentiates opportunity zones, and why do you feel like it's in some ways a superior tool in the community development, economic development tool chest to some of these historic programs that the government has put forward to invest in and support underinvested communities?
So, I would not say opportunity zones are the best or better. I will say they've been really, really effective. I think anytime you go into absolutes when trying to solve a major social problem, take energy. Say, for years people said nuclear is evil, and now nuclear may actually be much more energy efficient. Like we don't know. I think being open to all of the above solutions and being very focused on the problem is how I've always tried to tackle it, and I think that's how you make real change. So let's take the housing shortage in the country. There are estimated 7 million people who do not have housing. I think historically, government has focused on the demand side. Let's do rent caps. Let's do rent controls. Let's give people vouchers. And to the extent that government has focused on the supply side, it's been direct government funding of producing supply, low-income housing tax credit, new market tax credit. The problem is with housing, it's simple. There just aren't enough units in cities like Louisville that are growing where people want to live for people to live. So you can cap rents all you want. If there aren't enough units, it's still not going to address the problem. And the problem with direct government funding of affordable units is it's really, really expensive. So there's a study that estimates that for each unit built by the low-income housing tax credit, it costs up to $1 million per unit.
Wow.
The private sector builds units for $100,000 to $200,000. And so what we have seen from opportunity zones, and I think using housing as an example, why it has made a very real dent in the housing shortage, is it's market driven. Market and private sector does move faster than government by a long shot. There is not upfront government expenditure. So for the low-income housing tax credit, say we have these $15 billion this year we're going to spend. There's a 2 to 3 year process of how it gets allocated. There's a lot of friction, a lot of time, a lot of cost in an opportunity zone housing project. It's very simple. All you do when you make an opportunity zone investment to get the tax benefit is you put in your own money or your fund's money, and you file a one-page form with the IRS saying, I did this, and you get the tax benefit. It's much, much simpler. So the speed and velocity of capital is much higher. And so All In, EIG, who championed the opportunity zone legislation, did analysis, and it estimates that the government foregoes $26,000 in tax revenue per opportunity zone housing. It is 97% cheaper than the low-income housing tax credit. Now, low-income housing tax credit ensures deep affordability. I'm not saying LIHTC expensive and bad, opportunities and it's cheap and good. I am saying that we do not have the resources in this country to have the government build an infinite number of housing units, nor would we. And if we are going to make a dent in that 7 million number, the program that's 97% cheaper and moves 2 to 3 years faster is a huge part of the solution. And so, you know,
That's a really good point.
when you have, and you talk about, and we talk about one pocket thinking, it's both public policy, philanthropy, government all has a role to play, but the private sector typically moves faster, typically has less friction, and a well-structured market incentive like opportunity zones can really complement direct government expenditures and maybe carry the bulk of the water in these big problems like the nationwide housing shortage or energy, or pick any other
Yeah.
problem that we face.
Well, what I appreciate about that is you come at it more from a blended approach to say, hey, LIHTC's not bad. New market tax credits aren't bad. We actually need all of them. They bring different parts to the puzzle that a community fabric needs. I think that's better from a systems approach, saying, hey, actually, how do we actually bring more tools to bear? How do we build a blended strategy, something that's integrated? Because that's what communities need. They don't just need, from a balance sheet perspective, just equity or just debt or just this. They need all the above to help create and sustain jobs. So I want to kind of turn to your firm for a second. Kind of again, we're kind of talking in abstracts a little bit. So Blueprint Local, you've deployed over north of $200 million into opportunity zone communities. What's kind of some of the real world projects that you all have supported? Kind of help people understand, get a picture for maybe some of the ways that this has been applied kind of in local communities. And then I'd love for you to expand as you're doing that on some of the ways that you've worked with local partners to bring some of those other types of capital to support these communities. Because I think that's important, because at the end of the day, you're investing in real estate through equity. But you as a human, and I know you, that does desire kind of this idea of systems change and blended finance to support communities. You've also worked to bring other capital, other community partners to support those regions as well. What does that look like at Blueprint for you?
Yeah. So we always invest through local partners on the ground, and we provide the capital, sometimes minority, sometimes almost all of it, but we always invest behind local partners. And I'll give you two examples of projects that I think are some of the most exciting things going on in the country. We have an investment in a project in Charlotte called Camp North End. When it really follows the arc of kind of how the American economy has gone over the last 100 years. So Camp North End was first, it's a 76-acre site. It was built over 100 years ago. It was the first Model T factory in the South. It's in Charlotte, North Carolina. And you think of the Model T Ford and also kind of general manufacturing. It was the real engine of the country for, not pun intended, maybe not, for decades. Then it became, during World War II, a government military manufacturing factory, and it was through the Cold War. Made missiles, one of the biggest employers in Charlotte. After the Cold War, it became a drug manufacturing factory, employed 2,500 people. But after NAFTA and trade tariffs, all that is very much in the news today. Most pharmaceutical manufacturing moved to Mexico or otherwise overseas. Plants shut down. And this area that had been one of the biggest employers in Charlotte for nearly 100 years, over 10 years after the factory shuts down, becomes the poorest zip code in Charlotte. 2015, our partner buys the whole site and has spent already almost 10 years funding small businesses, opening restaurants, rehabbing all of these. This partner, Atco is their name, they're a great partner, has used all kinds of capital, historic tax credits, partnerships with local foundations, everywhere in between. We invested in the first multifamily housing on the site, but today the site is really probably the best story in Charlotte. There will be almost 1 million people who go on this site this year for some reason. Go to a restaurant, they live there. There's farmer markets, movie nights, art exhibitions. It's become a hub of culture. So to go from huge job engine to the poorest zip code in Charlotte to 1 million people visiting your site a year in about a 20-year span, I think if you look at the political headlines, the decline of Camp North End mirrors a lot of the stories of the decline of the American economy, but we've seen an amazing resurgence.
What if your giving could be more than generous? What if it could be truly strategic? At the AV Foundation, we help donors move from reactive to intentional generosity through donor-advised funds designed for impact. Starting with just $10,000, you can open a DAP that allows you to contribute cash, stock, crypto, and even real estate while receiving immediate tax benefits. But more than that, you join a growing community of givers committed to human flourishing and long-term impact. We believe in flexibility, transparency, and helping you maximize your assets under influence, not just assets under management. Our team offers personalized guidance, pooled giving opportunities, and tools to pass generosity on to the next generation. If you're ready to align your values with your giving, visit theavfoundation.org and take the first step today.
What I'd love to have you expand on a little bit too is some of the work, because again, back to the fact that you were really early into this work. There was a lot of, in the early days, like, okay, is this going to be real estate? Is this going to be investing in businesses, creating jobs directly in opportunity zones? How do we actually bring the philanthropic sector to the table that understand, hey, you are already doing grant activity in these communities? What would it look like to align some of those activities with the work of these investments so that these communities can thrive and we don't see the gentrification or the rapid increase in property values that we see sometimes in other markets? Maybe speak to that a little bit about the displacement or I think the barb that's thrown, so to speak, at opportunity zone investing, and that it benefits the wealthy and it displaces the poor. What are we
Yeah.
seeing?
So,
What are we seeing
yeah.
presently? Like, in the data.
So I'll give you an example. We had in one of our projects, there is a community meeting, and I think there are well-intentioned voices that I would say candidly just don't have the facts, saying, hey, if you go into a place like Camp North End and build really nice restaurants and bars and coffee shops and nice apartments, like the existing residents will get pushed out. And yes, it will be nice, but it will tear apart the fabric of the community. I understand the fear of that. I think in opportunity zones, that hasn't happened. So we were doing a project. There was a community meeting. The group was talking about how they were going to do this kind of food hall, restaurants, bars, kind of entertainment district. And a well-intentioned community organization leader, who, by the way, didn't live in the neighborhood, stood up and said, well, this is exactly the kind of gentrification we don't need here. And then a guy who was in the neighborhood, who was a bus driver, stood up and he said, he was told this story about how he was a big Carolina Panthers fan. And once a year, he and his buddies took a road trip to see the Panthers play the Falcons. And he talked about this project in Atlanta, Ponce City Market, that has been, it was an old Ford factory. It's been a revitalization of a neighborhood in Atlanta that was once, growing up in Atlanta, there was a Kroger by where Ponce City Market goes that people used to call the murder Kroger because it was one of the highest murder sites in the country. So Ponce City Market has revitalized this neighborhood. And this guy was like, this sounds like Ponce City Market. And the person doing the project was like, yeah, actually, I worked on that project. It's a very similar idea. And the guy was like, that is awesome. And then the community was like, well, but gentrification, displacement. And the guy was like, wait a second. He's like, we poor people like nice stuff too. And there's a paternalism around the gentrification narrative that's problematic. But looking at the data, what happens in a housing starved community when you build new housing? Charlotte, Atlanta, Louisville, cities are seeing a resurgence. The studies show that when you introduce new market rate housing, basic supply and demand, it actually depresses rents. Rents rise either less than inflation or flat, or in some cases, like Austin and Nashville, for instance, have seen rents decline in the last 5 years. They're two of the most expensive cities in the country because of their growth and attractiveness and how cool they are, all that. And there's been so much built that rents are actually dropping. And I think that for society is a good thing. How you end up displacing people is when there isn't the ability. And again, I think there are some cities that have trouble attracting new residents and people are leaving. A lot of problems in rural America. If you are not a net inflow city, housing's a very different problem. But if you're a city that has more demand to live there than supply, every time you don't build a new unit or can't because people are afraid of displacement, what ends up happening is people still want to live there. Capital will flow to the opportunity. What ends up happening is instead of building new units, private capital will buy the not very nice Class B and Class C apartments. They'll renovate them. They'll put in nice refrigerators and marble countertops and all that. They'll double, triple the rents. The people moving in with more money than the existing residents will live there. The existing people will get evicted because they can't afford $2,000 a month for a 2-bedroom when they were paying $800. That is how displacement happens when there isn't the ability to add new supply. So I think probably the biggest myth of housing/urban development today is building more market rate housing leads to bad gentrification and displacement. The data does not show that. And I think opportunity zones have added, there's another criticism of opportunity zones saying, oh, people are building stuff that wouldn't have otherwise be built. There's a study that shows, because not every low-income census tract was selected as an opportunity zone. Governors at every state only got to select a specific number. So if you say, oh, this was the gentrifying area of Austin, Texas, this would have gotten investment anyway, the study looks at similar demographics, similar education levels, if you're picked as an opportunity zone versus not. And this is comparing apples to apples. This is comparing gentrifying Austin and Nashville to gentrifying Austin and Nashville, not gentrifying Austin to Toledo, Ohio, which has more demographic challenges. There are over 300,000 new housing units that have been added in the opportunity zones versus the zones that would have qualified but were not selected. So the but for argument, stuff that is being done that would not have otherwise been done, the data supports that. And so, I think the average project we have invested in is not, and I cannot think of an exception to that. It is not buying up, pushing up rents, pushing out people. It is turning abandoned Model T and missile factories into housing, or turning parking lots. It's making productive use of underutilized land in an otherwise, for sure, attractive place. So there are 30, examples I could tell you of cities that have had a lot of positive momentum in the last 10, 20 years. But I understand the intention behind the displacement critique, but it's not in the data at all.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's not in the data. And the one thing you said that really kind of hit me was that poor people like nice things too. I think there's this other narrative that, like, let's just get people kind of survival level living. You know what I mean? And I think in these communities, oftentimes that's the goal. We just need jobs versus a bigger conversation around, well, what is a quality job? What's a job that allows for a person to have agency and to thrive and to provide for their family and to have mobility? And same with the housing, and same with walkability and quality of life and quality of place. And so I think more than anything, what I'm hearing is, especially around gentrification, we throw around these words in such a hyper politicized, society right now, but we don't actually take the time to get to understand the underlying motivators and the drivers and the opportunities that I think these new types of investment bring, or the people. Like, I would say that there are people leveraging opportunity zones in bad ways. There are bad actors in
For sure.
In every industry. There are bad actors.
For sure.
But to actually then label an entire industry or an entire group of investors with those motives, I think is ill-informed at the least.
Yeah.
So,
and everybody gets it wrong. Government gets it wrong too. I mean, there have been
100%.
many high-profile government programs that spent a bunch of money and that's just life. One thing I do like about the structure of the Opportunity Zone program is to your point about bad actors. So when I'm talking to senators, members of Congress, their staffs, the story keeps coming up. And I forget who wrote it, in one of the early high-profile Opportunity Zone programs that I would argue didn't fit the spirit of the incentive at all, someone raised over $100 million to build a tower Ritz-Carlton in downtown Portland, Oregon. It's like building the Ritz-Carlton. That's not what this is for. And Basically, what happened with that project is a Ritz-Carlton in downtown Oregon was not the right fit business-wise. That project has gone bankrupt. To the best of my knowledge, every investor in that project has lost everything. So over $100 million gets spent. It is all gone. The private sector bears the consequences of a project that I would argue is poorly thought out. And if you spent time in downtown Portland and figure out what's going on there, like building a Ritz was not. I mean, they faced massive state and local resistance. There are a whole number of reasons why the Ritz didn't work, and I'm not too familiar with the project, but it no the original criticism I get is like all these rich people got a tax benefit for building a Ritz in Portland. Actually, you only get the tax benefit if the project is successful because it is a tax on the money you would make from the project. So actually, nobody got a tax benefit from the project that you don't like because you know what? The community didn't like it either and it was not successful. And that is probably how these things should work.
That's a really good point. Well, and I think back to our earlier conversation a little bit about systems change and people talking about it a lot and you actually stepping out there and doing it. Actually, in the sense of opportunity zones, for in our modern history, it was a time where I think government had some innovative backbone. Like when you think about like who's funding innovation, you and I have talked about this before. Philanthropy and government should be on the edge of funding innovation to support communities and people. I feel like nothing was figured out day one, but like you said, I think historically, it has evolved over time and bad actors are going to get weeded out and the folks that pursue those types of projects and they don't get the backing of the community around them aren't going to get supported. But I mean, I think it's kudos to Tim Scott and Cory Booker and others for actually stepping out and saying, you know what, government can be innovative and support projects like this to move capital in meaningful ways. So I think that's a really cool testament. And it's going to reform. So talk to us a little bit about this new round. Like you've been involved, I think, deeply in shaping the next version of opportunity zone policy. What sort of reforms are on the table and what would, in your opinion, make this program even stronger as we look to the future?
Yeah, so there have been in the last couple of Congresses, it's been probably for the last 3 or 4 years, a couple of rounds of introduction of bipartisan reform. So what practically will probably happen, not probably, almost certainly happen, is this year there is going to be a tax bill. A bunch of aspects of the tax code across the board, not just opportunity zones, but much bigger things expire this year. So there will be a tax bill this year. Past couple of years, people like your local Senator Todd Young, my local Senator Mark Warner, a bipartisan group sponsors Extension and Improvement Act. The general saying is standalone tax legislation is almost never done. It needs to go into a broader tax bill. So these things have been introduced. The ideas have been out there. I think a lot of ideas have pretty good consensus from both sides. But some version of opportunity zones will make it into the tax bill this year. I'm pretty sure. The House last week, this is last week of May, the House passed the One Big Beautiful Bill. Opportunity zones were in it. In 2017, opportunity zones were not even in the House bill, generally because it was a Scott Booker initiative. The Senate has been deferred to on opportunity zones. So I think the big positive for the program is the fact that it's in the House bill, I think means it almost certainly is going to be in the final bill because the House will pass their bill, the Senate will pass their bill, and then they'll talk about what happens in the end. So I think the message from the House bill is opportunity zones are here to stay, probably no matter what. The reforms that I think are needed and have been in prior legislation, number one, reporting requirements. So a lot of the data that I have said is from independent researchers. We don't actually know how many opportunity zone investments have been made, where they are, et cetera, because investors are not required to report on it. We do, in our investor reports, we self-report. There's a broad industry, there's a broad industry framework for reporting. Many of the actors that I admire, we all agree with and already use the same kind of reporting framework. It's not required by the 2017 legislation, but I think there's general bipartisan consensus that knowing what's out there would be good and investors should be required to report it. So I think That's piece one. I think piece two is the program either in the worst case scenario will be extended another 7 to 10 years. And I think in the best case scenario for the program will be made permanent. In 2017, law passes. 2018, governors get to designate which census tracts are their zones. A lot of census tracts were low income in 2018, but it's actually gone off the 2010 census. So the data now is 15 years old. There have been a lot of neighborhoods that are much better off now than they were 15 years ago. I'd say that's a positive thing. I'd say there's also should be sunset and other neighborhoods should be picked. That's very likely to be in the legislation, which would be great. So updating the maps to be like, actually, we're seeing in Louisville, in Nulu, we're actually seeing really positive momentum. Maybe it shouldn't be an opportunity zone anymore. Maybe we should focus on other neighborhoods in Louisville. That would be great. I think a third piece that we have been working hard on. So today, and I don't know that there is a great policy reason for this, but today to invest in an opportunity zone, you have to have and get the tax advantage, you have to have a capital gain. You sell a stock, you sell a vacation home. We have an investor who collects very rare cars and he's always buying and selling cars and he's rolling his capital gains from selling his cars. You can see where this is going. A criticism of the program could be like capital gains. The very wealthy have a lot more capital gains than 99% of Americans. So you could say this is a great program. Really, the only people who can benefit are the best off people. Ordinary income, if you make a salary from your job and you'd like to invest something in the great opportunities in Project Camp North End, today you can't with a tax advantage. There's a provision, and it would be kind of like a Roth IRA where you can invest a certain amount of ordinary income each year into opportunity zone projects, which I would be very excited about because I think it dramatically expands who can invest. So that provision was in the House bill. I think the question of is the cap 100,000 a year, a million a year? I don't know. I think all of that, a lot of this comes down to a lot of the sausage making of legislation is Congressional Budget Office scoring, because the Opportunity Zone program has been estimated to cost $9 billion for the first 10 years. And if you look at government money in, money out, $9 billion to deliver over 300,000 housing units is actually excellent value for money. The low-income housing tax credit costs over $100 billion over 10 years and is delivering, from what we can tell, about the same amount of housing as Opportunity Zones. So, there are other more procedural things that are very interesting to practitioners, probably not very interesting to your listeners, but I think expanding the program, putting more impact guardrails on, and expanding and democratizing who can invest are the ideas that I think are most important.
Yeah, I love that. What about rural opportunity zones? Because I know that's been, especially in the first 10 years, a little bit more of a struggle. What are your thoughts there around the incentives for rural OZs or the opportunities as we think about the next iteration?
Yeah, so in the House bill, there is a big focus on rural. The best estimate is of the 80, and again, I wish we had reporting requirements so we had better data. This is our best estimate based off of what little bit has been released by the IRS. We have between 85 and 100 billion that's been invested today. Estimated 10 to 15 billion of that is in rural America. Now, on the plus side with rural, if all you passed in 2017 was a rural opportunity zone bill and you got 15 billion invested in rural America over 5 years, it would also be one of the biggest rural investment successes ever. So 15 billion in rural America over 5 years is, I think really, really strong. However, the challenge with rural obviously is it just takes a lot more time. I think there are two answers to rural. I think one, governors are learning and states are learning what kinds of rural projects will attract investment versus not. Just going back to the Portland Ritz-Carlton example, just designated something a zone doesn't guarantee it investment, because the project has to be successful. But we've been involved in or around a bunch of rural successes. So, for instance, Governor John Hickenlooper in Colorado, who we worked closely with, and he inspired a lot. He said his favorite word was topophilia, love of place, which is something I run with. And he's like, we really in Colorado need to recognize that like Colorado is successful because there are a bunch of unique places. Aspen, Vail, Steamboat Springs, some of the most beautiful places in the country. But the thing we need to recognize is the people who work in these places can't live there. The people who work in the restaurants and bars and ski lifts and public schools of Aspen, Colorado cannot live in Aspen, Colorado. So they had a big zone designation program where they designated the towns or zones closest to these iconic places that people travel all over the world to go to so that the workforce of Aspen or Telluride could live in or close, and created incentives for building workforce housing in and near these towns. And I heard this story recently. Many of these kind of tourism driven rural towns in Colorado don't have 5 days of school because they don't have the local tax base or the teachers or the bus drivers over who can do 5 days of school. So they have 3 or 4 days of school for the kids who live there, and they don't have enough kids who live there. There are 3 different towns that, because of opportunities in workforce housing, have gone from 3 or 4 days of school week to 5 days of school week because the people who work there are living there in much more full force because these workforce affordable housing units have been built. So on the one hand, getting smarter about how we use this incentive. This is not a unique problem to Colorado. Our country is full of very beautiful rural places where people go and spend a lot of money, and the people who live there don't necessarily have. I mean, if you're driving an hour and a half each way to work, you might work in a beautiful place, but going back to the poor people want nice stuff too. Like, is your quality of life great? Probably not. The other thing about rural is we partnered with Opportunity Alabama, led by an awesome entrepreneur named Alex Flaxbart, to create a statewide Alabama investment strategy. And this gets back to different stakeholders. So Alabama Power, a couple of the largest foundations in Alabama, a couple of very successful families in Birmingham, Montgomery, Mobile. There was a real coalition of people in Alabama saying, how do we use opportunity zones to truly get Alabama from point A to point B? And the outcome, I tell this story, I grew up in Georgia. We always used to say, thank God for Alabama, because Alabama made Georgia look great in test scores. Alabama is number 7 in the country in opportunity zone investment, not per capita, just raw. And I would say it is directly attributable to the success of this one initiative. Representative Terry Sewell, Democrat from Alabama, is from Selma, iconic civil rights place. She's a co-sponsor of the legislation, the opportunity zone legislation, in part because she's seen how opportunity zones have transformed her rural hometown in Selma. Selma has the famous Edmund Pettus Bridge, and she says people used to stay in Birmingham or Montgomery, come down, walk across the bridge like Martin Luther King did, take a picture, and then go home. Spend no money. Do not stay there. Add nothing to the economy, but come and take a picture. Opportunity Zone Capital built this hotel, the St. James Hotel in downtown Selma, with a huge workforce development program. I mean, the hotels can be done right. This is kind of the counterexample to the Ritz in Portland. And now she was talking about how the local small business ecosystem has transformed because you have a nice hotel. They have people staying overnight. So now there are restaurants because they have people who are staying there overnight, and they have nice restaurants that people want to go to as part of civil rights, tourism, learning journey, all that. They have coffee shops. People want coffee in the morning. Guess what? The residents now can go to a coffee shop because there is the customer base to sustain it, and residents can work in the coffee shop. And so I think one of the exciting things about Opportunity Zones 2.0, whether it's workforce housing for rural areas where the people who work there can't live there, or whether it's how could one investment actually be a tipping point for a town that doesn't have a local economy but could. We're learning lots and lots of lessons like this from across the country that are exciting.
That's really cool. Well, I should have started with this question, but I'll close with it because we could talk all day. But so zooming out, I think in closing, this will be helpful. Zooming out, why should people, because again, it's pretty technical, it's pretty finance heavy. Why should people who aren't in finance or real estate care about this? I mean, I'm thinking about like that rural American or that working class mom in Charleston, South Carolina, or you name it, Mobile, Alabama. Like, why should they care about what we're talking about today?
Yeah, so we have a project in Washington, D.C. called the Bridge District. It's in Anacostia. It's on the historic poor black side of the river, the rich white side of the river in DC. Like most cities in the country that are separated by an interstate or river or some boundary, Anacostia has not seen significant investment in 50 years. We have an awesome partner named Red Brick who has done 15 years worth of very hard work organizing the community around these projects. And a couple weeks ago, we had a ribbon cutting for the largest multifamily housing development in Anacostia, which we're proud investors in. And it was this rooftop thing. It was very cool. And they had everyone, including a bunch of community members who were there. And I talked to this woman and I asked her, like, she's lived in Anacostia her whole life. And I asked her, like, well, what do you think about the project? And she goes, here's what I think. My son, top of his class, went to Howard, went to Harvard Law School. Now he's working at a law firm in DC. And I was like, well, you can move back home to our neighborhood. And he goes, hell no, I don't want to live here. And she's like, he wouldn't live in this neighborhood, but he would live here. Like, this is an aspirational place. And the main thing I'm thinking is I want my boy to get a tour of this so he doesn't live 45 minutes away from me. He lives right down the street. And I was telling, this is the first generation in American history where the vast majority of parents are worried that their kids' lives will be worse off than theirs are. America has not ever had this intergenerational pessimism. And I think it is because, if you live in Anacostia, the kids who succeed want to move away. And the vast majority of kids are not going to Howard, not going to law school. It's like, man, the kids are going to stay here. Like, what does that future look like? And it could be Selma, or it could be Washington, D.C., or it could be rural Colorado, it could be anywhere. And I think, look, one investment isn't going to solve the world. One government program isn't going to solve the world. But I think the biggest thing the country needs is the belief in possibility that things could be different. The belief in possibility, if you live in Selma and you see these little things happening around the hotel, around the bridge, and the downtown is nicer than it was 5 years ago, you start to think, maybe my kid, maybe they'll move to DC and I'll never see them again. But like, maybe if they stay in Selma, like Selma will be nicer 20, 30 years from now. And I think that pessimism that things are on the wrong track has gotten our country in the mess we're in now. And I think we've got hundreds of stories of hope and this is going on the right track. And I don't need to get nice stuff once a year when I go to the Falcons game in Atlanta. There might be nice stuff in my neighborhood every day if things keep going this way. That change in vision is just the most important thing. That has nothing to do with tax advantage, long term investor or whatever.
No, but I love that. There's a quiet power in listening to someone who has held onto their ideals, not naively, not blindly, but deliberately over time. And that's what Ross brings to every conversation, and it's what makes talking with him always feel like time well spent. What I love about Ross, and I hope you heard it here, is that he doesn't shy away from complexity. He acknowledges the flaws, the missteps, the messy parts of programs like Opportunity Zones, but he also sees their potential. He's clear-eyed and hopeful in the same breath, and that's rare. In a world that's driven by short-term returns, Ross reminds us what it means to take the long view, to invest not just in deals, but in communities, to measure success not only in dollars, but in whether a son might move back home, whether a school can go from 4 days to 5, or whether a neighborhood feels like a place people want to live, not one they want to leave. I walk away from this conversation reminded that systems can change, but only if we choose to build them differently. And that starts with prioritizing relationships, asking better questions, and staying rooted in the belief that better is still possible. Thanks for listening. If this conversation moved you, challenged you, or sparked a new question, share it. And as always, we'll keep pressing in toward healing, toward justice, and toward flourishing. Today's episode of More Than Profit was hosted by me, Bryce Butler. Our executive producer is Crystal Esquivel, and our associate producers are Bryn McKay and Bailey Pendleton. Graphics design is by Justin Esquivel, and audio production assistance is provided by Resonate Recording.
Thanks for tuning in to More Than Profit, a podcast produced by Access Ventures. We hope today's conversation inspired you to think differently about how values, vision, and capital can create meaningful change. To stay up to date, make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. While you're there, we'd love if you left a review to help others find the show. Visit us at www.accessventures.org/podcast for additional content and past episodes. You can also join the conversation by following us on Twitter at ACS Ventures. I'm Bryn McKay, and you've been listening to More Than Profit, a production of Access Ventures. See you next time.